Okay, good morning everyone. สวัสดีครับ First of all, I would like to welcome Steve to this session, shining the light on DARKSIDE Ransomware operations. And for the beginning part, I would like to ask our Secretary General to give some opening remarks for this event. เรียนเชิญพี่เอี้ยงกล่าวเปิดในส่วนของการที่เราจะสัมมนากันในครั้งนี้ในหัวข้อ Shining a Light on DARKSIDE Ransomware Operation ครับจะขอกลับเรียนเชิญพี่เอี้ยงครับ
สวัสดีครับวันนี้ก็เป็นโอกาสดีนะครับที่ทางไฟได้มาช่วยเราในการที่จะให้ความรู้นะครับกับผู้คนในวงการ Cybersecurity นะครับในฐานะสกมชเนี่ยเราพร้อมนะครับแล้วก็ยินดีที่จะให้ความรู้ในเรื่องของ Cybersecurity ในการป้องกันภัยคุกคามอยู่ในลักษณะของการที่เป็นเซมินาร์ที่เป็นผ่านออนไลน์นะครับเป็นประจำทุกเดือนซึ่งครั้งนี้ก็เป็นครั้งที่6นะครับครั้งนี้มีความน่าสนใจมากเนื่องจากว่ามันเป็น attack นะครับที่กระทำโดย ransomware ที่มันมีผลกระทบต่อโครงสร้างพื้นฐานสำคัญทางสารสนเทศนะครับโดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งก็คือมันเป็นข้อระบบ pipeline ของประเทศสหรัฐอเมริกาซึ่งได้รับผลกระทบในการที่ถูกransomware นี้โจมตีนะครับจนกระทั่งมันถึงระดับที่สหรัฐเองยกระดับในการโจมตีว่าเป็นระดับของการก่อการร้ายซึ่งเราก็ถือว่ามันเป็นภัยคุกคามที่ค่อนข้างสำคัญมากนะครับแล้วก็เป็นภัยคุกคามที่เราจะต้องมีความรู้แล้วก็มีความเข้าใจนะครับในการที่จะต้องรับมือกับภัยคุกคามในลักษณะที่เป็นแบบนี้ซึ่งจะทวีความรุนแรงขึ้นทุกวันนะครับก็อยากจะขอให้ทุกคนตั้งใจฟังนะครับแล้วก็จะมีการแจกรางวัลนะครับจากไฟซึ่งก็น่าจะเป็นสิ่งที่เป็นทำให้เราสามารถที่จะดึงดูดคนนะครับเข้ามาในร่วมฟังแล้วก็จะได้รับความรู้มากขึ้นนะครับก็ขอบคุณทีมงานทุกท่านนะครับขอบคุณผู้ที่เข้ามาร่วมรับฟังทุกคนนะครับก็เชิญผู้บรรยายดำเนินการต่อได้เลยครับ
ครับขอบพระคุณพี่เอี้ยงครับลำดับต่อไปจะขออนุญาตเรียนเชิญคุณพิชวีนะครับ Country Manager นะครับของไฟได้กล่าวอะไรสักเล็กน้อยก่อนเราเริ่มเซสชั่นของคุณสตีฟนะครับเชิญครับ
สวัสดีค่ะก็ต้องขอบคุณทางสกมชนะคะแล้วก็กราบสวัสดีนะคะทางพลตำรวจโทดร.ปรัชญาเฉลิมวัฒน์นะคะแล้วก็ทางนาวากาศเอกอมรชมเชยนะคะที่วันนี้ให้โอกาสทางไฟไทยแลนด์นะคะได้เข้ามาแลกเปลี่ยนประสบการณ์แล้วก็แชร์ข้อมูลที่เราสามารถแชร์ได้ต้องเรียนว่าทุกวันนี้เนี่ยเทรดกับแฮกเกอร์เนี่ยมีหลายรูปแบบมากแล้วก็มีการพัฒนาตัวเองไปค่อนข้างไกลมากนะคะทุกวันนี้เนี่ยถ้าเราดูข่าวจากหน้าหนังสือพิมพ์จะเห็นว่าแฮกเกอร์หรือว่าการโจมตีเนี่ยไม่ได้เกิดกับแค่เรื่องของตัวเงินนะคะเราจะเห็นว่าการโจมตีเนี่ยอาจจะทำลายเรื่องของ reputation อย่างที่เมื่อสักครู่ทางท่านพลโทปรัชญาได้พูดถึงนะคะครั้งนี้เนี่ยเป็นการโจมตีที่ระบบ critical infrastructure ซึ่งเป็นอีกหนึ่งระบบที่สำคัญมากของสหรัฐอเมริกาแล้วมีการเรียกค่าถ่ายด้วย Bitcoin นะคะรายละเอียดตรงนี้เนี่ยเราคงไม่ได้พูดถึงในส่วนของผู้ถูกโจมตีแต่วันนี้เนี่ยไฟเราได้มีโอกาสเข้าไปช่วยเหลือลูกค้าหลายๆประเทศทั่วโลกนะคะหลายๆหน่วยงานและองค์กรที่ไม่ว่าจะเป็นผู้เสียหายหรือว่าต้องการเตรียมความพร้อมก่อนที่จะโดนการโจมตีต่างๆเหล่านี้เนี่ยเราก็มีโอกาสไปพูดคุยเพราะฉะนั้นวันนี้เราก็จะนำประสบการณ์เหล่านั้นเนี่ยค่ะมาแชร์ให้กับทางผู้เข้าฟังผู้รับฟังทางสัมมนาทุกท่านนะคะอีกอันนึงที่น่าสนใจคือวันนี้เนี่ยตัวแฮกเกอร์หรือว่าตัว ransom เองเนี่ยมีการปรับตัวไปเยอะเพราะฉะนั้นการปรับตัวเหล่านี้เนี่ยเราจะเห็นว่าเขาไม่ได้เป็นแค่การจู่โจมด้วยตัวคนเดียวนะคะเราพูดถึงขบวนการเราพูดถึง operations ซึ่งวันนี้มันเป็นชื่อที่มาของชื่ออีเวนต์ของเราก็คือ DARKSIDE Operations เขาทำตัวเป็นลักษณะของ Ransomware as a Services ตรงนี้เนี่ยเป็นยังไงเดี๋ยวทาง Steve นะคะซึ่งเป็น CTO ของเราก็จะมาเล่าให้ฟังในรายละเอียดว่าเขาทำอะไรที่ไหนเขา target กลุ่มไหนนะคะแล้วก็ที่ไหนที่ effect ไปแล้วบ้างเทคนิคเป็นอย่างไรแล้วท้ายที่สุดเนี่ยสิ่งที่ Steve เตรียมมาก็คือ การจู่โจมต่างๆเหล่านี้เนี่ยเราจะป้องกันได้อย่างไรนะคะมีวิธีการอย่างไรในการรับมือหรือการเตรียมความพร้อมหลายๆครั้งเราคิดว่าเราเตรียมความพร้อมดีแล้วเราวาง security ใน point ต่างๆได้ครบหมดทุกจุดแล้วแต่ถึงเวลาจริงๆแล้วเนี่ยมันมีประสิทธิภาพในการที่จะป้องกันการโจมตีเหล่านั้นมากน้อยแค่ไหนนะคะอันนี้เป็นเรื่องที่สำคัญมากแล้วหากเกิดเหตุการณ์ขึ้นมาจริงๆแล้วเนี่ยความรวดเร็วในการที่จะremediate หรือ contain ปัญหาต่างๆเหล่านั้นเนี่ยเราสามารถทำได้อย่างทุ่งทีหรือเปล่านะคะอันนั้นเป็นเรื่องราวทั้งหมดที่วันนี้คงจะให้ Steve มาแชร์นะคะ So Steve, I just give a very brief introduction of what we are sharing today. We're not going to mention about much of the victim, but mainly we'll talk about the operation of the ransom that has been evolved themselves. So why don't I over to you so that you can get the start of the session.
Great, thanks so much. Let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Steve Ledzian. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for FireEye Mandiant in Asia Pacific. I've been living in Asia and Singapore here for over a dozen years and visiting and helping organizations, both government and private sector as well, across Asia Pacific for many, many years now. What I'd like to talk with you about today is DARKSIDE Ransomware. There's been a lot of information in the news. Before that, just one piece of housekeeping. Our customers or organizations often ask us if we can share information about the incidents that we're part of, so that they can relate those incidents to their own experiences. Right? Unfortunately, the answer to that is no. We take every precaution to protect our customers' confidentiality and privacy. But what we can do is, as we were saying earlier, is relay the learnings from these incidents. So some of the facts and details may have been changed, but the learnings that you'll get today, I think, are very relevant and should be helpful for any organization, certainly critical infrastructure organizations looking to protect themselves, not just from DARKSIDE, but all types of ransomware. So here's what I have for the agenda today, a couple of sections. We'll talk a little bit about some of the successful ransomware attacks in critical infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit about understanding DARKSIDE specifically. And then I want to talk about how to address ransomware in a way that's intelligence-led. So we'll walk through the way a cyber analyst would walk through and understanding DARKSIDE and thinking about how can I protect my organization? I know that whenever these incidents happen in the news, organizations always ask the question, could this happen to me also? And that's a question they struggle to answer with. So we'll walk through and give some ideas on how you can answer that question. Then we need to talk about ransomware itself, because it is more than just DARKSIDE. There are many types of ransomware, and ransomware has changed very dramatically over the last year. And it's really important to understand the new differences and the new techniques in ransomware. So I'll talk about how ransomware has evolved. And last but not least, we don't want it to be all bad news. We want some good news and hope also. And so we'll talk about recommendations and what you can do to better protect yourself. So let's talk about some successful ransomware attacks, specifically around critical infrastructure. So this was in January of last year, an article in Bloomberg talking about ransomware attacks impacting ICS, or industrial control systems, sometimes called OT, or operational technology. And what was found was that ransomware variants were specifically targeting industrial control system infrastructure. So the machinery, the technology used in industrial control systems. So this was very concerning and it was an early sign that ransomware would spread from the IT networks, our office and back office networks, to the operational technology networks. In February of 2020, we saw CISA, which is a US government organization, report that a US gas pipeline had been hit. Now, this wasn't the one that happened in May. That was May of 2021. This was a year earlier, February of 2020. And this ransomware attack halted that pipeline's operation for 2 days. And I thought it was really interesting what they said. They said the ransomware encrypted the company's data on both the IT and the OT networks at the same time for maximum damage before requesting a ransom payment. And this is something we see ransomware threat actors doing, is finding the way to cause the most pain possible so that they can ask for the largest sum of money. Then I think the incident most recently, which people will be familiar with, was the pipeline attack on the US, which happened on May 7th, which led to closure of that pipeline out of the United States. This resulted in a declaration of emergency in 17 states. So the impact was more than just an IT impact, right? This was an impact that was very significant, that went beyond just IT. And we've talked about oil and gas and pipelines, but it's not just oil and gas and pipelines. It's really all critical infrastructure. We've seen ransomware attacks in healthcare, in important public services. And I'll give a few examples of those as well. But I think what's happening as governments are becoming e-governments and using digital transformation to digitize the services that they provide to citizens, we're seeing that infrastructure, that critical infrastructure, being attacked across all sectors. So let's look at a couple of examples of these. Late last year in September, there was a ransomware attack on a hospital in Germany. Right. And what we've seen, this isn't the only hospital to have been hit by ransomware. But what happens when hospitals are hit by ransomware like this is their systems go down. And in some cases, they may have trouble admitting patients. They don't have the technology to receive that patient coming in. And of course, patients coming into hospitals may be coming in for emergency care. And so if the hospital is unable to admit that patient, they may need to tell that ambulance to go to the next nearest hospital. And so that's a delay in care, and this has resulted in the death. So as a result of a ransomware attack. This year in April, we saw a police station out of the United States get attacked as well, some of their data stolen. And police organizations may have informants. And those informants' confidentiality is obviously very important. Those informants are in dangerous situations. If an attacker is able to steal the data of a police organization and expose those informants publicly, right, that is a risk to life as well. And so think about and imagine what sort of ransom demands can arise from those types of situations. In the financial services industry, I thought this one was quite interesting, and this was related to DARKSIDE as well. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but one of the things that ransomware actors are doing is they are publishing the data that they steal from victims. And so the attacker knows when they intend to publish that data, when they intend to make it public. And they also know that when they do that, very likely that organization, if they're a publicly listed organization, their stock may take a hit. So they know in advance when a stock will go down because they're going to cause it to go down by publishing stolen information. Well, that information, this, in a sense, it's like an insider information, is very valuable. And so DARKSIDE reported on selling that information to people who wanted to play the stock market, get that information early, place a short sell on the company that the DARKSIDE ransomware affiliate was about to publish information for. So you can see that ransomware has evolved in very interesting ways, and it is not just about impacting IT systems. It's about business impact, organizational impact, societal impact, sometimes life and death issues. At Mandiant, Mandiant is the services arm of FireEye. What Mandiant does is, among other things, is we do incident response. So, of course, companies do their best to try and prevent these attacks from happening in the first place. but prevention isn't a sure thing. Sometimes prevention fails, and when it fails, those organizations need to figure out what happened and what to do about it. And so Mandiant helps to answer those questions to organizations who are victims of cyber attack, all types of cyber attacks. What we've seen, we've tracked over the last year, the volume of ransomware attacks. So you can see by December of 19, only about 1% of the victims that we were responding to help those victims, only about 1% of them were ransomware. And we do a lot of this. In 2020, we helped over 1,000 victims. So it's about 3 a day. Fast forward to September of 2020, and more than a quarter of all the victims that we were responding to were ransomware victims. Right? So ransomware has just exploded in terms of risk to organizations, and as we're seeing in the news, to critical infrastructure as well. Let me take a pause there and also invite you all to ask questions, right? So if we can make this interactive, I think it'll be more interesting. As we go through, we'll take pauses from time to time to answer questions from the audience. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those. So let me pause here and check and see if we have any questions so far.
Okay, while we were waiting for questions, let me show you our giveaway prize for the first person that we choose the question to ask you, and we will discuss about this. So for the first person, we will have a very nice hoodie jacket from FireEye to give away. Okay, so anyone that post the question on our Facebook live feed, we will choose one that I think will be more interesting and ask you those questions. Okay, but while we are waiting for that, I guess I will give some summarization in Thai for a few minutes, and then we continue. Okay, ครับก็ในส่วนของช่วงแรกก็ยังเป็นช่วงของการอินโทรนะครับแต่ว่าสิ่งที่สำคัญที่สุดสำหรับช่วงแรกที่ทางคุณสตีฟได้นำเสนอไปก็คือสถิติของเหตุการณ์ในเรื่องของ Incident Response เนี่ยนะครับถึงแม้ว่าจะมีการพูดถึงทางกลุ่ม Mandiant แต่มันก็เป็นอินดิเคเตอร์ที่ดีนะครับเพราะว่าในส่วนของการดำเนินการตรงนี้ส่วนใหญ่มันจะต้องเป็น Incident หรือเรื่องราวที่มี Impact ค่อนข้างรุนแรงเนี่ยจะพบว่ามันมีเหตุการณ์ที่เกี่ยวข้องกับเรื่องของ Ransomware หรือ Ransomware Operation เนี่ยที่เป็นสถิติที่สูงมากๆนะครับแล้วมันก็เลยเป็นเทรนด์หรือแนวโน้มที่มันจะเกิดขึ้นได้แล้วรูปแบบการโจมตีเนี่ยมีความหลากหลายมากนะครับอย่างเหตุการณ์เมื่อช่วงกุมภาพันธ์ปี 2020 เนี่ยก็เป็นเรื่องของ Pipeline นะก็เราก็คิดว่ามันเกิดแล้วมันไม่น่าจะเกิดอีกแต่พอมาถึงเดือนพฤษภามาวันที่ 7เนี่ยก็เป็นเหตุการณ์ในส่วนของเรื่องของ Pipeline อีกเช่นกันก็คือในส่วนของ OT System เนี่ยนะฮะก็จะถูกโจมตีแล้วก็บางครั้งในการโจมตีของกลุ่ม Ransomware เนี่ยจะไม่ได้ทำเฉพาะในเรื่องของที่จะเน้นเฉพาะด้านใดด้านหนึ่งนะครับคืออาจจะทำทั้งในส่วนของ OT นะครับแล้วก็ทำในส่วนของที่เป็นเหตุการณ์ที่เกี่ยวข้องนะครับกับเรื่องของตัว IT System ทั้งสองทางเลยนะครับแล้วก็นอกจากนั้นก็ยังมีวิธีการที่ Creative อีกก็คือว่านอกเหนือจากการไปขโมยข้อมูลแล้วนะครับก็มีการที่จะเข้าไปเอาไปยุ่งเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของตลาดหุ้นคือเอาความลับมาขู่ว่าจะเผยแพร่โดยรู้ว่าถ้าเผยแพร่ไปเนี่ยหุ้นจะตกนะครับเป็นอีกวิธีการหนึ่งในการที่เขาจะดำเนินการให้ได้ประโยชน์นะครับในส่วนของกระบวนการของการพลิกแพลงของการเข้าไปโจรกรรมข้อมูลเข้ารหัสข้อมูลนะมีการเรียกค่าไถ่ของตัวข้อมูลแล้วก็หนักยิ่งกว่านั้นคือเอาไปแสวงหาผลประโยชน์ในการเผยแพร่แล้วก็ทำช็อตเซลล์ในตลาดหุ้นนะครับฉะนั้นในส่วนนี้ก็จะเห็นได้ว่าทิศทางในเรื่องภัยคุกคามด้าน Ransomware เนี่ยก็มีวัฒนาการแล้วก็มีการดำเนินการที่ค่อนข้างจะหนักขึ้นเรื่อยๆเลยนะครับนะโอเคครับตอนนี้เราเริ่มได้คำถามเข้ามาแล้วเดี๋ยวเราให้ทางทีมงานนะครับช่วยเลือกคำถามที่น่าสนใจนะครับแต่ระหว่างนี้ก็ขออนุญาตให้Steve please continue with the presentation and for the next pause we will give you some of interesting questions for you to answer okay Great. Please continue
thank you Okay, so let's talk a little bit about DARKSIDE ransomware. And again, this is just one of many types of ransomware organizations need to think about. So this is, again, from Mandiant. This is DARKSIDE victims per month, and you can see DARKSIDE growing in popularity. There's been a drop-off, and we'll talk about that shortly. But one of the interesting things of DARKSIDE is it falls in this model of ransomware as a service. And what that means is there's not just one attacker attacking you. What it means is that the DARKSIDE crew builds infrastructure and malware in the form of ransomware that they allow their affiliates or their partners to use to break into organizations. So it's a little bit like a criminal ecosystem. And on the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see the DARKSIDE panel, which the DARKSIDE ransomware authors provide to their affiliates, and they're selective with their affiliates. You may need to take an interview with them to become an affiliate to be approved. And so that is the scale and scope that these sorts of attacks are happening with. And what's really important to understand too is that DARKSIDE is similar to other ransomware in that these affiliates, these partners, when they use the ransomware, they're not doing it in the old way of emailing out ransomware. So the attack is actually an intrusion into the network where they break into the network and they follow these steps. They start with initial compromise, they break into a network, they establish foothold, they then steal privileges or escalate privileges, stealing credentials. They then do internal reconnaissance, mapping out the internal victim network, because when they deploy the ransomware, they want to deploy it on critical servers, because if they do that, they can ask for more money. So this is why they need to break into the network first. They need to then move to those critical servers, maintaining persistence along the way, and they may iterate as they move from network segment to network segment, and eventually they complete the mission. And it's only at the end that they deploy the DARKSIDE ransomware. The very last step is when that malware, when that ransomware is deployed. But you can look at these other stages. They're using other tools. They're using vulnerabilities. They're using communications callbacks. They're using other Trojans. They're using password theft tools, right? So they're using remote control access. So there's many opportunities to stop the attacker before the ransomware comes. You want to stop them while they're in the process of intrusion. If you try and stop DARKSIDE by saying, let me stop the malware, you're starting here. You're starting on the very last step. You really want to start over here. You want to start as early in the attack as you can. And that's true not just for DARKSIDE, it's true for any sort of advanced cyber attack and ransomware.
Okay, Steve, can I ask you a question? Because
sure.
A lot of this software that was involved with the operation of this group, I think quite a few of them would be able to be detected by antivirus or anti-malware. For example, the Mimikat, the one that could be used to dump username and password. But how could they avoid the detection when they do these operations?
Yeah, so there's reports that say antivirus today is really only about 50% effective, right? So you've got a 1 in 2 chance of actually stopping malware. Now that's traditional signature-based antivirus, right? Antivirus has evolved into next generation antivirus that uses techniques like machine learning or behavioral techniques. And those methods bring that 50% up to something much higher, but they don't bring it up to 100%. It's still the case that attackers are able to, with very little effort, create small differences and variants in malware that endpoint protection systems or antivirus or even next generation antivirus systems cannot see, right? So you don't want to just rely on this last piece. You want to have many chances to stop the attacker, not just one chance to stop the attacker. And if you can catch any one of these, then you know that an attack is in progress. You can try and interrupt or disrupt that attack in progress before the attacker deploys the ransomware. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay. Very good. But 50% doesn't sound very promising.
Yeah.
So I guess continuous monitoring of abnormal behavior will be.
So I bet a lot of people in the audience have heard of the idea of zero trust. And one of the core tenets of zero trust is to have a mindset that your prevention will fail, right? That you're already breached. And by having that mindset, it's saying, I'm not going to think that 100% of this last stage will attack. Instead, I'm going to expect that someone is able to get in, that I'm going to assume a breach. And by doing that, I'm going to build other capabilities that are looking for other things other than just malware. Because not all of these things are malware. Some of them are exploitation. Some of them are valid tools. RDP, how do you tell if RDP or TeamViewer are being used in a malicious way instead of a valid way, right? So there's things that you can look for other than malware that can give you a heads up that there's an intruder in your network. And that's one of the core ideas behind Zero Trust.
Okay. And also, after we take a look and discuss about this diagram, it seems like maybe we should monitor the remote access connection that could allow the attacker to take control of the system. For this example, TeamViewer or RDP, I think that could be the shortcut way for providing the protection.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a good suggestion. And really, you want to do that in two different ways, right? So the first way is a detection way, so that if an attacker tries to break in, you have a chance to detect it. But the second way is an investigation way. Maybe I detect a bloodhound usage. And so I know there's an intruder, and now I'm going to want to know, well, how did the attacker get here? I want to rewind to the previous step. And in order to rewind to that previous step, I need to go to telemetry. And I need to look at that telemetry and say, okay, show me all of the connections, and let me try and unravel and understand forensically what led up to this discovery. And that can eventually get you back to how did the attacker even get in the first place? So if you think of a physical model like a warehouse, right? If you're trying to protect a warehouse and your warehouse gets robbed, it doesn't make sense to add the CCTV cameras into the warehouse after you've already been robbed. You need those CCTV cameras running before the incident, so they're recording what's happening. And the same is true for cyber attacks. You need to be recording the telemetry and the events before the incident. That will give you the information that will enable you to go back and investigate.
Okay, so you need to provide useful logging mechanism, right, for all the actions and activities, so that after, if something badly happened, we will have something to go back and try to do the investigation. Okay, and seem like that would be something that we need to do after the incident, but
Absolutely.
We could do that afterward. We have to do that before it's happening, right?
Yes.
So that would be valuable. Okay, and maybe some of the audience might be curious about Bloodhound. I guess that is some kind of tool to audit or pen testing the Active Directory. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's related to Active Directory. So attackers will sometimes use it as well. So there's lots of things that kind of fall into this category of legitimate tools, like it's escaping my name. Empire, for example, is a red team pen testing tool, and there's many others. Beacon comes from a tool set, Cobalt Strike, that is meant for red team and pen testers, but is also used by attackers as well. So it's good to be familiar with those things.
Great. You answered the question with another interesting questions that lead to what is Cobalt Strike?
Yeah, so Cobalt Strike is I would say a red team or pen testing tool set. And it's most well known, I would say, for this element called beacon, which allows for callback communication. So, right, when you're attacked digitally, you have a remote attacker who comes into the network in some way. That network is protected by a firewall, which doesn't really allow incoming connections. Callbacks are outgoing connections, right? And so it's those outgoing connections that the attackers use to interact with the victim environments. And Beacon and Cobalt Strike is a popular tool to be able to do that.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much. Please continue with the presentation.
Sure. Actually, we're at the next section. So I can check if there's, maybe we can check if there's questions. If not, I can jump in to the next section.
Okay, we got some list of questions here. And I think the most interesting one is about the dark side. Okay, the question is from our Facebook users, Kun Matthew. He was asking for the dark side. Is they basically stealing data, or they try to cripple the system as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And we will we'll talk about that in an upcoming section, but let me try and answer it quickly for you now. The short answer is both. And so Matthew has asked the exact right question in how ransomware has evolved, right? So ransomware 2 years ago was about a service disruption. It was about crippling the network. What attackers have figured out is that organizations, depending on the type of organization, they actually fear having data be exposed publicly more than they fear a service disruption. So that's a bigger business impact. And we'll talk about why in a few slides. But attackers are now doing both so that they can maximize the pressure on the victims that they attack to try and extort a larger ransom. So it's a good observation. We'll talk more about it in a little bit.
Okay, please continue.
Okay. So now I want to talk about this from a cyber threat intelligence perspective, right? And how could we maybe know about DARKSIDE, and how can we, because these threats are coming all the time, right? Every week, every month, there's new threats. So how can we stay ahead of them instead of react to them? So I'm going to switch to a web browser and walk you through a chronological or a time sequence on DARKSIDE and show how an analyst might be more informed about DARKSIDE. So for this, I'm using a tool called Mandiant Advantage, and this is a threat intelligence tool. It has other capabilities as well, but we'll focus on the threat intelligence component. And we can get information on DARKSIDE. We can get a description of it. We can see all of the capabilities. You see all the significant capabilities that DARKSIDE has. So this is a very capable malware. There's also, you might be interested in, as an analyst, what's happening in the news with DARKSIDE. So all of the public news information, we also have, if it intersects with the DARKSIDE malware, so you can quickly come up to speed with what public information is available. And then there's reports that are not public. So a part of cyber threat intelligence is talking about, well, what's being seen with this malware? What are the TTPs? What are the indicators, and so on? And there's many pieces of information for DARKSIDE as well. We can also take a look at the indicators, for example, and we can see, DARKSIDE really kind of came onto the scene in August of 2020. Right? So again, the DARKSIDE really made the news in May of this year, but DARKSIDE was around much before that very big incident. And so organizations have a chance to plan for types of attacks like this. One way to plan is to not just think about defending. Remember the question I asked earlier. When you see these things in the headline, the question often is, could this attack me? Could I be a victim of this sort of attack? And that's often a hard question for organizations to answer. One way that organizations are answering that question is with a capability called security validation. And this is different than an indicator of compromise. If an indicator of compromise is the defense, security validation is the offense. It's a way to actually test the attack in your network. So there is DARKSIDE component that you can safely pass through your network security controls and get a definitive answer, yes or no. Did my firewall, did my antivirus, did my endpoint, did they stop DARKSIDE? Right? That's different than a detection. That is the ability to test your security controls. And that is something that we released in February of this year. Let's take a look more on DARKSIDE. Another thing you may need to know about DARKSIDE, if you're a victim of DARKSIDE, is what are the capabilities of this malware? Now, this gets very technical very quickly, so I won't go into this in depth, but there's an extensive list of what is this malware doing, how is it doing encryption, and understanding all of that information about the malware in detail is also something that you might need to have on hand. We talked also about news analysis. So the DARKSIDE ransomware, remember, one of the things that I said is they sell the information that they're about to publish stolen information from one of their victims. And they sell that information because it's useful for shorting stocks. So it's information to be able, it's good to be able to have that information from the media, but also see some analyst comment on how that might impact organizations. By the way, these DARKSIDE variants change all the time. So it is not just one instance where security validation is where you want those attacks to be able to be tested in your network. We released a second one on April of 29th as well. Now, this is where it gets interesting. We're talking today about DARKSIDE, but DARKSIDE is just one of many of these ransomware as a service threats. There are many others. There's Abaddon, there's Babak, there's Conti, right? So there's many of these you need to worry about. And one of the things that's important to understand is how often are these groups impacting victims? So this is as of May 3rd, and you can see for each of the platforms, Abaddon, which is something similar to DARKSIDE, who are the victims that they are posting information on publicly. Babak, Conti, you can see all the DARKSIDE victims. So it's good, it'll help to educate you to get a handle on not just what is in the headline, maybe DARKSIDE today, but what are the other groups that are actually successful in attacking victims. And as I said before, you don't want to think of DARKSIDE as a malware. You want to think of DARKSIDE as a remote human intrusion into your network. Because if you think about it as a malware, you're really starting when the attacker is finishing. You're starting at the attacker's last step. And so it's really important to understand these affiliates, their tactics, techniques, and procedures that they use to break into networks, to recon those networks, to study them and move across what sort of industries they're attacking, what sort of geographies they're attacking. We talked about the volume already, and so on. Okay, so this was all done before the attack in May on the pipeline, right? So then we saw that attack happen. FireEye talked about not just DARKSIDE, but also the affiliates. And so let's take a look at how we talk about those affiliates. So these are the DARKSIDE affiliates. Now we name not just the malware, but we name the groups. And sometimes you'll see our groups named UNC 2628, right? UNC stands for an uncategorized cluster of activity. And we talked about this attack lifecycle. Well, remember, DARKSIDE is just the malware. It's the affiliate who's doing the intrusion that precedes the malware. And there's more than one affiliate. And each affiliate operates in different ways. So what that means is that you can't just worry about one chain of attack, because one affiliate may have one chain, another affiliate may do an intrusion in an entirely different way. So we talk about one of the affiliates, UNC 2628, and how they use Beacon, some of the Mimikatz, credential theft. But there's another affiliate called UNC 2659. This affiliate exploits vulnerabilities in security products. This affiliate is using TeamViewer. So they have a different mode of attack than the other affiliate. And there's a third affiliate, UNC 2465, and they're using different capabilities as well. They're using RDP, and we talked about Bloodhound. So if we rewind to the element we talked about before, it's not only DARKSIDE that we need to worry about. It's many of the other ransomware as a defense, but it's even worse than that because each one of these has different affiliates. So you have to worry about not just DARKSIDE, but all the different affiliates for DARKSIDE, and not just Abaddon, but all the different affiliates for Abaddon. Okay, so the problem is much bigger than just one type of malware is the point that I'm trying to get across.
Yeah.
Yes, question.
Okay, for one thing I want to ask you before we continue is that this Mandiant Advantage, you offer it as a free subscription as well, right? Not just for client.
Yeah, so we have different layers of service with Mandiant Advantage. One of those layers is a free tier layer. So you can try it and you can see some of the information that's available in it and get familiar with it. And at the end, I'll have a slide that has a QR code. So if anyone in the audience is interested in trying that free tier of Mandiant Advantage, they can click that QR code and we can help to get them set up with this tool.
Mm-hmm. And also the report we are looking at right now, is that in the free Mandiant subscription or for the paying customer?
So off the top of my head, I'm not sure the answer to that question, but I will say when there is very significant news, we often release the reports that are related to very high profile significant news in the free version because there's such a wide interest. So generally we will do that, but these specific ones, I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure if they're part of that.
Okay. Well, that's great. Okay, please continue.
Great, thank you. Okay, so and following that attack in May, there were a lot of interesting occurrences. So the U.S. President Biden signed in sweeping executive order on cybersecurity. We can take a look at that executive order on the whitehouse.gov website. And one of the interesting things I thought that was called out was this line here. They said the scope of the protection and security must include systems that process data, information technology, and those systems that run the vital machinery that ensures our safety, the OT technology as well. So I thought it was interesting that they were explicitly calling out the OT, the critical infrastructure networks, industrial control system networks as well. We continue to release more security validation content as we learn more. So this was an update on May 14th. This was a release exclusively for DARKSIDE ransomware. So all of the specific tests that our customers could use were related to DARKSIDE. And so you can see all the different variants. So we asked earlier about, hey, well, why wouldn't antivirus stop this? Well, one of the things attackers do is they make many different variants, right? And it's a race between how fast can the attackers create those variants versus how fast can the security companies come up with signatures of those variants. And you can see we're on variant 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. There's many, many variants. So that's one of the challenges of traditional antivirus as well, signature-based antivirus. Okay, so now the last chapter in the story, and that is what happened on May 15th. So these are a series of 3 tweets from FireEye that I think are interesting and I wanted to share with you as well. So Mandiant has observed multiple actors cite a May 13th announcement that appeared to be shared with DARKSIDE Ransomware as a Service affiliates by the operators of the DARKSIDE service. The DARKSIDE announcement said that they lost access to their infrastructure, including their blog, payment, and content delivery network servers, and would be closing their service. Decryptors would also be provided for companies who have not paid, possibly to the affiliates to distribute. The Post cited law enforcement pressure and pressure from the United States for this decision. Mandiant has not independently validated these claims, and there's some speculation by other actors that this could be an exit scam. So what do we mean by exit scam? Well, remember, the DARKSIDE ransomware has affiliates, and when they collect money, they need to pay those affiliates. Well, instead of saying that, they may say, well, look, we're under so much pressure, our servers have gone down, our infrastructure has gone down, we can't pay you. We've lost control of our infrastructure, and then run off with the money, right? And so that's the idea, that it could potentially be an exit scam. But what that means to you is that DARKSIDE has kind of gone dark, right? Since then, there hasn't been a lot of activity with DARKSIDE. So while this presentation is about DARKSIDE today probably isn't the number one threat that you need to think about. It's probably going to be one of these other services, right? So you need to think about the other types of ransomware that are attacking victims. And that was as of May. Let's forward this a month to June 7th. Okay, so just last month. This list is longer than the list in May. So the groups of these ransomware as a service actors, they're growing, right? And so while DARKSIDE may have gone dark, the other threat actors are growing in volume. So this continues to be a problem you want to think about and a problem you want to be proactive about. We also shared, and this was as of June 16th, so we're almost up to present day here, a pretty interesting blog about how one of those DARKSIDE affiliates used a supply chain attack, compromising a CCTV security camera system. And so this is quite an interesting read as well. I know supply chain attacks have been in the news quite a bit recently as well. And here we're seeing ransomware and supply chain being compromised. Speaking about antivirus, in this article, we share one of the MD5s related to this attack, and you can plug that MD5 into VirusTotal. By the way, this article was released when? It was released June, right? So it's at least 2 weeks old. If we come to VirusTotal and look at that, only 18 out of the 65 antivirus companies are detecting this today, right? So FireEye is there as one of the ones detecting, but it's weeks now that have passed that this public blog has gone out and there's still not pervasive detection, right? So this is evidence why you can't always rely on technology alone. While DARKSIDE has gone dark, there's also been news as well that now fake crews are pretending to be DARKSIDE, just mailing out organizations saying, I've compromised you, I'm about to publicize your data, without actually really compromising those victims, and hoping that the victim will be scared enough to pay any sort of extortion, right? So this, I would say, is a timeline to think about DARKSIDE, and really the key message here is it's not about DARKSIDE individually, it's really about the collection and the ever-growing presence of all of these ransomware crews that organizations, especially critical infrastructure, need to think about and need to be prepared for. Okay, any questions so far before we talk about ransomware in general?
Okay, I think there's some very interesting question, but we can answer it afterward. The question is, right now, there's a lot of cyber insurance services that could be offered to companies and companies who have bought this type of insurance. If they got attacked by ransomware or ransomware gang, they could easily pay by use the insurance money. Do you think they would be the case for the incident in the rising of the ransomware incident, because they can buy cyber insurance now, and then if something bad happens, they can just pay off so that the ransom gang can be quiet.
Yeah. So I would say insurance is a good component to prepare for ransomware, but it's not a cure-all for ransomware. I would not say that it easily fixes the problem. And the reason for that is if you have a downtime, a service disruption, it may give you the money to buy the decryptor from the threat actor, but you still had a downtime. That downtime is still extremely painful. There may be reputational damage as well, right, to your organization. And so while the insurance can help with a ransom payment, there are more business consequences than just having to pay the ransom, right? If there is loss of data, there may be a PII or a public health, protected health information. And so there's other consequences to think about. So it's not to say ransomware, insurance to address ransomware is bad. I think it's helpful, but don't think it easily fixes the problem. It's just a helpful tool. And also you can bet that the insurance companies have seen the volume in ransomware, and the actuaries are thinking about the rates. And so you can expect those insurance premiums to be much higher than they previously were. And some of the insurance agencies have just stopped altogether with ransomware insurance policies. So it's good to look at, it's helpful, but don't just look at that and then forget everything else, because there's other considerations. We'll talk about those considerations when we come to the recommendation section.
I think to the Steve point, this is very important because we also work with many different insurers as well and broker. We see that the premium price is actually increased significantly in the last couple of years, because earlier it was not having much of the cases. So recently, why I was spoke with other companies, with the insurers, it seemed that they start to be very careful in terms of getting the insurance for the customer. So yeah, this might be something that is need to be considered.
Okay, and another part of the question is that since now there's a lot of ransom gang, they offer this as the ransom as a service. Do you think more bad guy will get into the business because it might be easy way to make money and people could pay by using their own insurance? Do you see any correlation between this and more rises in ransom cases?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. So we call this a low barrier to entry, right? It means it's easier for new criminals to start in this area. And the reason is because you don't have to do the full end-to-end attack anymore. You don't need to be a programmer to create the ransomware malware. Maybe you just need some hacking skills, some intrusion skills, and then you can get the malware from other criminals who provide it as a service. So that means that the individual criminal activities are getting specialized. And when you get specialization, you get more capability, harder to defend against. So I think, yeah, that's a good observation that we'll continue to see this be a problem. And it's very hard for organizations to defend against. They're doing their best to defend, but what you're seeing now is government stepping in and saying, this is becoming too big of a problem, and we need to address this at a policy level as well. But that's a work in progress.
Okay, please continue.
Great. So let's talk about ransomware in general and how it's evolved. And in fact, at Mandiant, what we've started doing is we've started calling it multifaceted extortion. To the question Matthew was asking earlier about, is it about service disruption or is it about stealing data? And the answer is it's both. It's both, right? So it's multifaceted. It has multiple parts. And so let's talk about how it's evolved. The first evolution is what we call post-compromise ransomware. And sometimes this is called human-aided or human-assisted ransomware. And the idea is that the old way to do a ransomware attack was to take ransomware, put it in an email, either as an attachment or a link, and spam it to many organizations, many email addresses, and to hope that some small percentage of those people would be tricked into opening the attachment or opening the link. And when they do that, the machine that they're reading that email on becomes infected with ransomware and they can't access their files. So that's what we saw maybe 2 years ago. That's the old style of ransomware. And the problem with that is that the machine that is being used to read that email, it's not a very important machine usually. It's important to the user, but it's not important to the overall business. And so the ransomware actors said, look, we don't want to encrypt email machines that are being used to read email. We want to encrypt the business servers because we can ask for a lot more money if we encrypt the business servers. But the attacker said the problem is no one reads email on those business servers, right? So we can't inject the email, the ransomware through an email to those business servers. So what they said is what we're going to need to break into the network so that we can get onto those business servers and deploy the ransomware manually on those business servers. And that's the new post-compromise ransomware. It's much more targeted, it's much more impactful, and it requires an intrusion into the network, almost like a APT or a cyber espionage theft, the way a hacker would break into a network. That's what the ransomware actors are doing now today as well. They didn't do it before. Before it was just an email message. Now they break into the networks, find the important servers, and encrypt those important servers, all together, multiple servers, to try and get the maximum impact and the maximum leverage to try and force that victim to pay the ransom. Okay, so that's the first evolution. And so what that means is the nature of the problem is that this is not a malware problem. This is a remote human intrusion problem. And so like I was talking on the 6 stages earlier, you want to stop the problem as early as possible when that intrusion is happening. This is how to think about it, right? So the attackers, step 1, they break into the network. Step 2, once they're in the network, they steal passwords, get onto the important servers, find the important data. Step 3, they encrypt that important data with ransomware. And step 4, they demand a payment. Now the malware only comes in step 3, right? That's when the encryption happens. So if you try and address this as a malware problem, you're telling the attacker, I'll let you have step 1 and step 2 for free. And I'll only try and start stopping you on step 3, right? So you don't want to do that. You want to try and stop the attacker on step 1, not step 3. And that's why it's important to think of this as an intrusion, not just as a malware. There's some interesting side effects to post-compromise ransomware as well. The old style ransomware where someone was tricked into opening an email message, the attacker was not in control of the timing of the attack. The ransomware fired whenever that victim opened the email message or opened the attachment, right? Could be on a Tuesday, could be on a Wednesday. Whenever they read that email is when the ransomware fired. But with the new post-compromise ransomware, the attacker is in control of the timing. They're in the network, they're on the servers. And so when do you think they will time the attack to occur? Usually it's on a Friday afternoon, right? Or at the very least on a holiday weekend or evening hours, because they want to maximize the confusion and the panic and the chaos, again, to try and encourage that victim to pay. So this is an interesting aspect of post-compromise ransomware as well. So the second evolution is adding data theft to the mix. So here was our formula before, right? Break into the network, find the important data, encrypt the important data, and ask for the ransom. Well, the attacker said, wait a minute, we've already done all this work. Breaking into a network is not easy. Getting onto those servers and stealing the credentials is not easy. We've already done that work. Why don't we add an extra step while we're here before we encrypt that data? Why don't we just steal the data? We're already on the server. And so that's what the attackers do. They steal that information and then they encrypt that information. And now it's a double impact, right? Not only can you not access your important data, or maybe your important services are down because your systems aren't functional, but also the attacker's holding your data. and is threatening to make that data public. And that data could be intellectual property, it could be the emails of your executives, it could be your customer information, it could be your partner information, it could be HR information, it could be anything, right? And so this adds to the leverage that the attackers have, and that's why you're seeing the ransom prices go up so high today. We're regularly seeing $1 million and double-digit $1 million ransoms. Right, so I know we're all dealing with new normals. You need to also change how you think about ransomware. Ransomware used to be a service disruption. Today, it's a data breach. So evolution number 3 is what they do with this stolen data. So they shame, taunt, and coerce their victims. So who will the threat actors who have stolen your data threaten to share that data with? Well, first, they threaten to share it with local news and media, right? And so that's really interesting. And we'll come back to that point in just a moment. But that means that the public will know that you've had a cyber attack. They also threaten to share it with regulators, right? And so this could add regulatory pressure. In some cases, they threaten to share it with your customers. And I'll give an example of that in a moment. And in the case of it, if they steal intellectual property, we've even seen that they threaten to share that with your competitors. And so all these, they're not attacks on IT systems. These are attacks against the business itself. And that's how we need to see ransomware, not as an IT disruption, but as a business disruption. Here's an example of a threat actor. Let me pause. I think we've got a question. But I can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Okay. Our Secretary General would like to join in with some questions.
Oh, please.
Steve, do you think we can do some kind of protection at OS level? Because at the operating system level, they control everything in logging mechanism. So if someone want to do some encrypted on the file, somehow if you put some protection mechanism at the operating system level, I think we can do something with the ransom. Besides the attacking from the external network.
Yeah, sometimes I have thoughts like this also, right? So my thinking is, this seems like an engineering problem, a technology problem and an engineering problem. Shouldn't there be some engineering fix, like putting something in at an OS level that makes this problem go away, right? That fixes it once and for all. There should be some way to engineer a solution to this engineering problem. Well, I would say that it's really not an engineering problem. It's really a problem of human creativity. There are many companies. So Microsoft at the operating system level has made enormous security enhancements in their operating system going into Windows 10. And many organizations have somewhere between 30 and 50 layers of additional security controls beyond the operating system controls to try and prevent these things from happening. But these attacks are still happening and still being successful. So I would say the way to think about this isn't as an engineering problem. You want to think about it almost like as crime, right? Crime has an element of human creativity. And we put the police forces in place to try and prevent as much crime as we can. But no one expects the police to be able to reduce the crime level to zero, right? And that's because criminals are creative and they're always doing new things. And I would say that is the way you want to think about cybercrime as well. A lot of the things that attackers do, once they steal a password, they can do anything that user of that password can do. And it's very hard for operating systems or other security controls to ask the question, is the person who logged in with this password the real individual, or is it a cyber criminal who has stolen that password, right? And without the ability to tell the difference between those two, it has to let those actions that come with the authorization of that password go through. So this element of creativity means there's no quick fix. Now, that's not to say it's hopeless and don't try, We want to put in as much prevention as we can, but we have to understand, like crime, that prevention will not bring us down to a 0%. And there will be successful intrusions, and there will be things that we need to do beyond just the prevention mechanisms. And in the last section or the next session coming up, I'll talk about some of those recommendations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, or should I proceed?
Proceed, please.
Okay. So this is an example of a ransomware threat actor communicating with the customers of its victim, right? So you've got the threat actor attacks the victim. That victim has customers, and the ransomware threat actor is communicating with that victim's customers. And this happened in April of this year. And so on the left, you can see the email of the attacker to the victim's customers. So I'll just read it. It says, your personal data has been stolen and will be published. Good day. If you receive this letter, you are a customer, buyer, partner, or employee of this victim. The company has been hacked, data has been stolen, and will be soon be released as the company refuses to protect its people's data. And what they mean by that is the company, who's the victim, refuses to pay the ransom. That's what they mean. We inform you that information about you will be published on the darknet at this location. If the company does not contact us, call or write to this company and ask them to protect your privacy. Right? It's a little bit ironic because they are the perpetrators behind the privacy violation. They are the ones who stole the data, and they are the ones who are going to publish the data, but they are contacting that victim's customers and saying, help us to convince that company to pay the ransom so that your privacy isn't violated. This is how audacious threat actors have gotten. But this brings us to an important point. It means that with this type of attack, the attacker is in control of whether or not the public knows you got hacked, not you, right? So you can imagine that in the past, before attackers started stealing data, it was the victim who controlled the public story. The victim could say, no, I didn't get attacked, or no, it was an IT outage, or just not say anything at all. But when the attacker steals the data, the attacker takes that power away from the victim. And it's now the attacker who decides who knows about your breach. Because as soon as they make that breach public, that's in the attacker's control, everyone will know. And so it's important to realize that if you're the victim of a ransomware attack today, it's very likely you cannot hide that breach because the attacker will make it public. And so these are the differences between ransomware and multifaceted extortion, right? So the business impact of ransomware was just a pure service disruption. But with multifaceted extortion, it's much more of a breach. You have stolen data. Now, if I ask you what's the best way to deal with ransomware, probably everyone in the audience will say, well, backups. Make sure you have good backups. And that's true. If you have good backups and your files are encrypted, you don't need to worry about decrypting them. You can just restore them from backups. But with multifaceted extortion, does a backup save you if an attacker has stolen your data and is threatening to make it public? No, right? The backup doesn't help in that case. And again, the disclosure of the breach, the public announcement of the breach, yes, it was in the control of the victim with ransomware, but it's in the control of the attacker with this multifaceted extortion. And with a breach comes additional business impact. There may be, there may be regulatory fines. There may be higher reputational damage. There may be legal consequences. And so you add all this together, and that's why ransomware, it's almost a completely different problem, and why we wanted to use this new name, multifaceted extortion, because if businesses are thinking these are the impacts, I want to address ransomware, and these are the impacts, but the reality is today these are the impacts, then the businesses aren't working off the right information. So we want to change the name, call it multifaceted extortion, and so that people understand that the impacts are different than they were with the ransomware that they saw even just a year and a half, 2 years ago. Things move very, very quickly. Let me take a pause there before we jump into the final section on recommendations and see if we have any questions. Any questions? Okay. All right. Okay, I think we might have had just a small network glitch. I think we're back. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. So I'll proceed, and maybe we save questions to the end then.
Okay.
Okay, so let me start with recommendation number 1. So the recommendation number 1 is pre-mediate. What do we mean by this word pre-mediate? It's a made-up word. What we mean is remediate beforehand. So I mentioned that Mandiant has helped many victims of cyber attacks and ransomware. And at the end of helping those victims always ask us, hey, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? It's a smart question. And so we tell them, look, do A, B, C, D, and E. Do these things so this doesn't happen again. Well, why wait to be a victim to do those things, right? Do A, B, C, and D before the attack comes for the first time. And that's what we mean by premediate. Okay, and so this is all about preparation. And the premediation isn't necessarily about buy this thing. It's more about, do you have the right process and do you have the right architectures in place? So you want to reduce the blast radius. If you do get hit by ransomware, is your segmentation in place to contain that ransomware so that doesn't spread from the IT network to the OT network? Are you doing things like having credential management in place to make it harder for the attackers who intrude into network to steal those passwords and use those passwords to get on critical servers? But also practice these red lever events, means emergency events. How fast can you recover? Have you ever thought about what would be the impact if you disconnect your organization from the internet? Right? Have you practiced that? If there's a need to disconnect from the internet, are you ready to do that? Do you know what will break, what won't break? Right? So practice that beforehand. Operating with key functionality off the internet. And then preparing to restore, right? Making sure that you have surge support. If you need to install multiple desktops, who is the organization that's going to help you do that? The tasks that you'll do yourself versus the tasks that you outsource. So all these things aren't things that you buy. They're planning and preparation that you do in advance of an attack. And we've written a white paper, and this white paper is publicly available. We can share the URL to put up on Facebook. It's called Ransomware Protection and Containment Strategies, and it's 22 pages, and it's all of these pre-mediation recommendations, all of the things that you should do before your first ransomware attack so that that first ransomware attack never comes. And again, it's not about necessarily buying solutions. It's about taking those best practices and learnings. And there's 2 companion webinars that are available on Bright Talk. One is called Vigilance in the Era of Ransomware as Big Business and Proactive Ransomware Solutions. And if you watch these 2 webinars, 2 hours, and you read these 22 pages and implement the recommendations in these 3 things, you will be in a very good position against ransomware. You will be pre-mediated. And so this is something I encourage all organizations with a small investment of time, educate yourselves on what are the things that can help this attack from being successful in the first place. Recommendation number 2, I've talked about many times. I said this is a human intrusion problem. We want to stop it early while the human attacker is intruding, not at the very last step when the attacker is ready to deploy the ransomware manually. That's going to be too late. And so the best way to do that is with what Gartner calls MDR. It stands for Managed Detection and Response. And the goal of a Managed Detection and Response service is to identify prevention failures quickly. Well, you might be thinking, don't we know when prevention fails? And the answer is no. You won't know when prevention fails. In fact, we measured for those victims that Mandiant helps, we always measure from the time the attacker intrudes to the time someone notices, how long do you think that time is? So think for yourself just for a moment, how long you think organizations in APAC take to realize that there's an intruder in the network? The answer is 76 days, 2 months. So that's our measured number on detection of a prevention failure, detection of an intrusion. That's a very long time. We also see with ransomware, it takes about 3 to 5 days for the ransomware threat actors from the time they break in to the time they get over to the important servers and deploy the ransomware manually on those servers is 3 to 5 days. So you see the problem. The attacker is done in 3 to 5 days. The defenders don't even know there's a problem for 2 months. So how can we notice that there's a problem more quickly? This is the idea behind MDR, Managed Detection and Response. At FireEye, we have a MDR service called Mandiant Managed Defense, and we measure the time it takes us to notice from 76 days, not down to 2 days, but down to 2 hours. And this is a great question to ask your own organization, right? How long would it take to detect an intrusion? Is that something you're measuring? From time to time, almost all organizations have intrusions. And so this is a good metric to track in your own organization over time. Let me come back to our web browsing. And I want to share a little bit more about DARKSIDE and this human component, right? So let me give you an idea of some of the non-malware based things. So yes, there's malware protection you need to worry about. But one of the things attackers do is they attack Microsoft UAC. So this is the user access control feature. So this is the idea that we heard earlier. Can we put something in the operating system to try and stop the attackers? So this is Microsoft saying, yes, we've put in UAC. What UAC does is it says, if you try and do a privileged operation, we're going to prompt the user for a confirmation that this privileged operation should happen or not, right? And that should help with attackers who are trying to escalate their privileges to administrator privileges. So here's what you have. You have attackers who start by escalating privileges. You have Microsoft says, let's put in UAC to try and stop that. Well, there's UAC bypass. So the attackers say, hey, there's ways around what Microsoft has put in place. And so UAC bypass, there's many ways to do UAC bypass. So FireEye's come and said, let's try and stop the UAC bypass. So we bring it up to the next level and say, let's look for those bypass. So it's a cat and mouse game, but that's something that's not malware, right? The UAC actions. Another thing is, this is explaining the UAC. Another thing is protecting credentials in the first place. So one of the things we talked about mimic hats earlier that attackers will do is they'll go into memory and they'll extract that memory and then try and pick cached passwords out of that memory. And so is there a protection against that as well? That's not malware. And so yes, right, Windows 10 has protection. FireEye Solutions offers something called Process Guard, which try and stop. Now, these are, the point I'm trying to make are these are ways to stop the attacker in the intrusion phase before they deploy the malware, right? So there's things that you can do earlier in the intrusion phase that are not malware based that will help in ransomware attacks like DARKSIDE, because they're all going through that chain in different ways, right? So that's recommendation number 2, focus on the human intrusion, not just the malware. Recommendation number 3 is focus on both defense and resilience, right? Now, there's a difference between a company who prepares prevention for ransomware and then gets hit, and a company who prepares for prevention but also says, if I get hit, here are my processes, here are my plans, here's my recovery process, and has not just defense, but also resilience in mind. That second company will do a lot better. And so there's a type of service on the market called ransomware defense assessment. FireEye is one of the vendors that offers this. And it looks at your security architecture, but it also looks at the business aspects. Do you have a response plan if you do get hit? How will you do communications? How will you do recovery? And so it's not just looking at how do I prevent, but in the event I do get hit, how do we make sure that we minimize the business impact and the business pain? Recommendation number 4 is to validate your defenses against attacks in the headline. So this is what I started with when I was talking about security validation. It's not just ransomware. There's been many headline news over the last 6 months, right? The SolarWinds incident. There was an incident with other vendors. There was the proxy logon vulnerabilities. All of these made headlines, and organizations all over the world ask the question, could this happen to me? Is this something that I'm vulnerable to? Every time one of these things are in the news, security validation can help you to test in more definitive way whether or not you're actually protected. Help you to answer that question, could this happen to me? And in the case of DARKSIDE, when it was in the news as well, again, we have intelligence, cyber threat intelligence on DARKSIDE before even the notable incidents, right? So these are things that you can do in a proactive way, not just with response. The last is to inform your decisions with cyber threat intelligence. So we talked earlier about the free tier of Mandiant Advantage. This is the QR code. The QR code is a little bit different. It will, instead of taking you to a website, it will compose an email for you. And then you can just click send on that email, and it will communicate with the right teams inside of FireEye. Just make sure that your identification is there, your name and business email, and so on. And we can help to get you access to the free tier of Mandiant Advantage. You can understand the threat intelligence capability. It has many other capabilities as well. For more information, some of the useful links in this presentation, the DARKSIDE blogs that I went through, the ransomware remediation. Of course, FireEye has a local team in Thailand that you can reach out to as well. Maybe the easiest way to reach us is to mail apac@fireeye.com if you would like a private briefing for your specific industry and critical infrastructure or otherwise. We have a local team that can come and talk with you, understand your situation, and make some recommendations about maybe how to help you. Let me pause there and see if we have any questions before the final wrap-up.
There's a question. There's
yes,
a question for you. In the graph that you show that there are many cases that you have provided incident response for your clients. The question is, how many of them, if there are, is recurring, or you have repeated customer in this statistic? Okay, for this one.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have that number. It is quite common. We have a saying that says, once a target, always a target.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So, it's not that the attackers come and say, well, we've hit this company, let's not attack them anymore, let's move on to a different company. They will attack again. And that's particularly true, not so much for ransomware threat actors, but for cyber espionage, right? Espionage, intelligence collection, very much has very narrowly focused targets, and they will try and attack it. Another thing I would say related to that is sometimes when we're hired to come in and do incident response because they suspect something's wrong, about 30% of the time, what we find is that there's not just one attack group in the network. There's actually multiple attack groups in the network. And there's different groups with different motivations concurrently in that victim network. That happens more often than you might think. And it goes to the idea that a lot of times when these intrusions happen, they're invisible and they go undetected.
Okay.
And I think normally the attacker will also reattack again with the same organization within 60 days as well, Steve. So that's what we normally see in the market.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of our customers.
There's a point where we need to be very careful and actually be ready for all the response and attack that could happen. Not just like, okay, I got it and then I'm fine. Maybe I solved that and then we're not going to see that again, right? So this thing is actually happening all the time. So
yeah, that's absolutely right. A lot of our customers, as they're coming through IR, right, as the incident response is finishing, they'll say, look, you were able to answer my questions. I understood what happened. We understood what to do about it. Can you just stay, right? Stay and protect us so that this doesn't happen to us again. And the answer is yes, we can stay. And the way to do that is through a managed detection and response service. It's a way to provide a sort of proactive incident response 24/7 by 365 that notices the intrusions really quickly. And once it notices them, interrupts them and kicks the attacker out of the victim network before they can do any damage. So that's the idea of managed detection response. Is probably the most impactful thing that organizations can do today, not just against ransomware, but all types of cyber attacks.
Yeah. And I think that's a very good point. One of the things that I want to add is that there's no one single services or technology that could, solve all these attack things that could happen. It's actually require lots of area that you need to think about this. Like zero trust is one thing. The response, the continuous monitorings and everything. So it's actually the holistic approach of the cybersecurity. So it's no longer like the silo kind of approach anymore.
Oh, that's right. Well said.
Okay, so I guess even though there's no vaccination for ransomware, but there might be something close to it. But it will require a lot of remediation in many of and also the cooperation between the unit and function, both inside the organization and also the CTI from the outside as well. Okay, so before I wrap up, Kun Nui, would you like to say something in summarize?
Sure. I think from all the sharing by Steve, I think I hope that we have a good fruitful session for the rest of the audience. And as I said, right, the important thing is not only when you detect the intrusion, but it's actually important how much time you actually spend to actually contain and to really know what to do with that attack, right? So preparation is one thing, right? Responding is one thing. So how would you look into the holistic approach? And as I said, the threat intelligence is important for you to actually be ready for all the plannings and to aware of what's happening. The more you know much better than others, the more you can protect better, right? And of course, although you have like a lot of security control in place, you have like antivirus, you have the firewall, you have like multi-factor authentication and everything, right? At the end of the day, how can you know that is all these tools can help you to protect that? How effectiveness of these two can be ready for the attack, right? So you need to simulate. You have to be ready for all the attack that could happen. So testing your environment, assessing your environment is very important. Yeah. And I think last page is like what we are working as a partnership with NCSA. So for those who like respond to our feedback form that will be sent out by the NCSA, we will have some lucky draw for you guys. So please feel free to do so. And also today what we're sharing is quite brief, but if any of the audience or any organization would like to have more information in terms of the deeper information about the ransom and the attack, so please feel free to contact me or the rest of the team in local, or even go to the NCSA because we are working closely together. And upcoming, we also plan for the deeper workshop kind of thing, which NCSA will be running for the next activities. So stay tuned.
Okay.
And last but not least, Piemon and Secretary General Prashya. So I would like, on behalf of FireEye and Mandiant Thailand, I would like to thank you for all the partnership and cooperation that you allow us to be here to share all the information, and hopefully we can do much more in the future together.
Okay. Okay, I will do the short summarization in Thai. ก็วันนี้ก็คงได้ฟังข้อมูลเกี่ยวกับเรื่องของ DARKSIDE แต่ว่าไม่ใช่เฉพาะเรื่องของ DARKSIDE แต่เป็นเรื่องของวิวัฒนาการของ Ransomware นะครับแล้วก็รูปแบบที่เปลี่ยนแปลงไปรวมทั้งได้คำแนะนำในการที่ว่าเราจะรับมือกับมันอย่างไรบ้างนะครับเนื้อหาในสไลด์นี้ท่านสามารถที่จะสแกน QR Code เพื่อไปตอบคำถามแล้วก็จะได้รับเวอร์ชันของตัวสไลด์ที่สามารถเอาไปศึกษาเพิ่มเติมได้นะครับ so Steve, I would like to thank you very much for this great and very insightful information. So I guess now we can see the dark side of DARKSIDE and understand more about their operations, and hopefully it will prepare for to have better protection as a whole.
Thank you also for the opportunity to present to your audience and to the audience for all the great questions. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we sign off for now until next time. So thank you everyone. Okay, bye bye.
Thank you.
ขอบคุณค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ ขอบคุณค่ะ